Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Experts. Today, I have a very dear friend. I've known this person for a very long time, Shan Wormstein, who's a president at RBB Communications, a PR firm specializing in all things public relations. And we're going to dive into public relations today. Shan, thanks for joining me.
Oh no, Jeff, I really appreciate you reaching out and look forward to us kind of touching base. And like I said, we've known each other for a while, so catching up even more.
Awesome. So today we're diving into PR, public relations. We're gonna suss out things that entrepreneurs should be focused on when it comes to PR. But before we get into that, can you just talk a little bit about your journey? How did you get into public relations?
How did an accident originally thought I was going to be an architect, and quickly kind of learned it wasn't what I thought it was, and so I had done some classes towards a mass comm minor. You could fast forward it. Here I am now as a partner at a PR firm today, but not a lifelong dream story or anything quite like that. But something I'm very happy about now.
Got it. Well, you've been in PR for quite a long time. What do you find most rewarding about the role in the space?
Yeah, so I would say, PR is nothing if interesting. Every day is different. It might be helping a client through challenges, learning about a new industry, just watching how kind of the media and the information landscape, changes. So I get a lot of different experiences. I mean, I've been doing this for about 20 years. I've worked with, pretty much in every sector, clients from entrepreneurs and startups to, big public companies. I've gotten to work with CEOs of, companies you've heard of like Hilton or Brown and Brown, or celebrities like David Beckham and Richard Branson. And while that sounds like name dropping, to me that's not the most exciting part of the job. Kind of what I would say was, for me, is the most rewarding part. As you said, is really kind of the chess game that PR is, and that's what keeps it interesting to me. Is you create a strategy, you kind of anticipate moves, and then ultimately your goal is to get that checkmate at the end of the day. And so it kind of allows you to have no 2 days be the same, and always, because it's always about the industry's evolving, you really keep current with a lot of things, which is interesting.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to ask a follow-up question related to that answer. You mentioned checkmate. How do companies think about winning when it comes to public relations? What are some success stories? You don't have to use specifics, but what are some things and outcomes that entrepreneurs should look for when considering if PR is a strategy they should deploy?
Yeah, so I think, for every company, it's going to be a little bit different in the sense of, if you're a company that sells a physical product, PR is something that's going to contribute to sales. And so you want to think about the things, the metrics that we associate with that, whether it be the number of stories we secure, placements in certain types of outlets, other sort of measures, if you will. That'd be one way to look at it. But if you're a service-based company, a lot of times it's your reputation, because when you go to meet a new client, when you go to maybe find investors, you want them to think of your company in a positive way. So it's a bit more qualitative, and it really, I couldn't neatly necessarily put it into a box. So when I think about wins, there's sometimes where I'd say, oh, I've secured a client and great opportunity with the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and that seems like a big one. But then there's another time where a client says, hey, we got this story in a trade magazine, and I got four client or four calls for leads, so that's great too.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's, if I do crisis communications as well, and sometimes with crisis it's, hey, it wasn't that big of a deal. Or it might be an M&A situation, and you know what, things with our employees went really smoothly. We call that change management.
Yeah.
So that's kind of internal and stakeholder comms, and so it's working through that. So there's not a simple answer, and success could kind of look different in a lot of ways.
Right. Well, those are really good scenarios, and obviously everyone can appreciate new sales, and so those are tangible. But it's not always about top line. It's about making sure that people are happy, that outsiders think about your business in the right way. So that makes a lot of sense. Appreciate those scenarios. So you mentioned a little bit about this previously, but throughout your career, I'm sure PR has changed a lot, and especially with the rise of digital media and social media, I'm sure that's had an impact. Can you talk about how PR has evolved over
Mhm.
your career, and what are some trends that you're seeing now?
Yeah, so I would say it's funny. On one hand, like you said, PR is completely different. And on the other hand, it's actually not different at all. So when I started, when I joined first year on the job, I spent a lot of time in front of a fax machine, putting together client reports that had actual print clips. Imagine having to like cut out an article from a newspaper and glue it to a piece of paper and make a clip report. So when I tell new hires at our company those stories today, it's like I'm the old man saying, I went to school, uphill both ways in the snow with one shoe. That's what you feel like. And
You're not
I
that
think
old,
about it,
Sean.
that's
You're not that old.
just under 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's amazing how different it is. But what hasn't changed is the value of good storytelling, the importance of a company having a good reputation. So while maybe some of the peripheries change, the way we do the job has changed, some of the core tenets are really the same. When I think about the evolution, what I would say is that I could kind of talk about it in two ways. The first is diversification. So that is really what constitutes PR. It's a lot broader, but I think a definition now, and where and how you could reach, your target audiences. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is what I'd say has changed is it's now we operate in a controlled velocity, meaning things are fast, fast, fast. And you say, okay, so we got to be really nimble, but you can't lose sight of your North Star of your strategy. So you still want to, be deeply rooted in that strategy because otherwise you're going to kind of be wandering aimlessly or always chasing your tail. So I think that that's really important. When I think about it kind of in the current day and trends, I don't know if I'd use the word trends, but maybe if I was talking to a client, kind of guideposts that I would say are directives. And the first thing I'd say is don't try to be everything to everyone. More than ever, really being targeted in what you do and not employing what we call a spray and pray approach, which is just going as wide as you can kind of all the time. That's probably one of the first things I'd say. Additionally, you think about the digital world that we live in now, like you said, you have to play to the algorithm. The way that media reports stories is based on the number of clicks. The way obviously things show up on your social media feed is based on an algorithm. So you got to take that intelligence and not ignore it. You do need to shape your story to kind of, let's say, the rules of the game. And then the third thing is I'd say be your own newsmaker. It used to be you were traditional earned media. So when I say earned media, I'm thinking, that's newspapers, websites, TV, et cetera. It used to be earned media was kind of the bullhorn. Well, now companies and entrepreneurs and CEOs, they get to be they have their own bullhorn, whether it's LinkedIn, it's a podcast like we're on now,
Hmm.
it's an email campaign. So that's certainly another part of, it's, let's say PR and marketing, or a term we sometimes use, marketing communications. But that's probably the other thing I'd say, in 2024 is really important to focus on.
Those are great points. Thanks a lot. So you talked a little bit about what PR is
Mhm.
and the things that can help that have changed in the PR landscape now. What are some common misconceptions or mistakes that people make when it comes to PR that you recommend they avoid?
Yeah, I say I probably see these things a lot because PR is a tool that a lot of businesses use, but by nature, it's not something somebody does every day. So they come to the table with preconceived notions. And so I'd say the first misconception is exactly that. What is PR? A lot of people think it's just getting coverage of yourself or your company in traditional media outlets. But I think that that's probably, or not probably, definitely too narrow a definition. The way I've described today is PR is about influencing and engaging your key audiences across numerous platforms to essentially improve your reputation and awareness. So it could take on a lot of different, elements, kind of depending upon what the goals of your potential program are, or what you need to achieve, for your company. The next mistake I'd say, or misperception, but probably more of a mistake, is businesses and entrepreneurs deciding when they need PR. Normally you think, okay, we're about to launch. This is the moment for PR. We're ready to go. We got to hit the ground running. I need as much media coverage right now.
Thanks a lot for that, Sean. I appreciate that response. So, I want to get into a little bit of the dynamic when we talk about external facing communications and
Hmm.
how you recommend founders and entrepreneurs and owners of the company manage their personal brands when it comes to communicating with the public. How important is it for entrepreneurs to build their personal brand, and what tips do you have to do this authentically?
Yeah, I would say that, a founder's personal brand is vital because, especially at the start of a business, the business is a founder. The founder is the one meeting with investors, customers, attending events, recruiting employees. So creating kind of a personal connection with that brand, with that company through a founder is really, really important. And ultimately, it's going to be your strongest form of PR, I think, in a lot of ways, and it could unlock other PR or marketing opportunities. So when it comes to building that brand, I think being authentic is really, really important. It's one of the most, if your brand isn't authentic, you're going to kind of quickly be found out, or it's going to quickly feel very fake in
Mhm.
some ways. So
Yeah.
when kind of putting your personal brand together, I'd say there's kind of a series of questions, maybe even 5 questions I'd ask myself. So the first is, what is it that I or the business do that's either unique or different that others would benefit from knowing? Now, we don't always reinvent the wheel with every business. I understand that. But there has to be something that you feel that you do the best or that distinguishes you. As you think about building your brand and maybe what you want to be known for, are you passionate about it? Because if you're debating a couple different things, the one that you want to talk about, the one that you want to emphasize, the one thing that you're most comfortable about, that's where you should build your brand. You also should think, am I willing to be outspoken? The type of tactics that you might want to use, how kind of the interesting, if you're doing thought leadership, the way in which you can be interesting with your POV is going to be, ultimately a comfort level thing. You want to look at, is the space crowded? Are my competitors talking about this? It's not to say you don't add to that. I mean, there's some times where you have to be in the space, otherwise you're missing an opportunity. But you do want to consider that. And then you want to make sure that when you say what's your personal brand, is that reflected on your website, your social media channels, et cetera.
Yeah, makes sense completely. Okay, so going back to the example of the your consumer products or your industry, your insurance example, um, how do we think about businesses that are trying to sell new products, and how do we think of how should they think about promoting product features versus values and transformations? How
Yeah.
do you
So
shift, yeah, sorry, how do you shift that perspective with your clients to think about the benefits of using it, not just the actual nuts and bolts?
yeah. So I could say when it comes to my clients, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's an event, benefits based messaging is at the core of what we do. It's really most important. And so what we want to do is when we create these core messages is we do something we call a message footprint. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to define that brand by its brand meanings and its personality traits. The meanings being, what are the things that people think of when they say that brand, or what do you want them to, if you're a new brand, what do you want
Yeah.
them to say?
Mhm.
And then how would they describe you? Just like you would describe, you know, I know Jeff. He's a funny guy. He's a so-so golfer. Things like that. Well, maybe that's not a so-so golfer. It's a personality
Systems
trait. But you,
overrated.
you you understand a little bit when I say personality traits, the way your brand is perceived as well. So first, you want to define those, and once you define those into you have three meanings and you have three personality traits, you want to create three key messages that answer three questions. And this all kind of gets back to the benefit side of things. So number one is, who are you? Meaning, what does the brand do and what does it represent? The second is, why should I care? When I say I, we're talking about your customer. At the end of the day, that's the lens that you want to think through. What are you delivering to them that has value? And then the third thing you want to ask is, what do you want them to do about it? That's the call to action. Essentially, that's your chance to sell. But when it's messaging, it's a little less of a hard sell. And so
Mm.
once you draft those, you'll then support them with your proof points. That's your facts, your figures, et cetera. But it's all geared towards the benefit of having somebody understand what you do and why it matters to them and what do they want to do about it. Other quick things on benefits based messaging is always think about it from your customer's perspective.
Mhm.
So if you're in a one-to-one sort of basis where you're selling individuals, well, how does it make their life easier? easier. Make it personal to them. If it's about something benefiting a business, think about it being purposeful. How does it help them sell to their customers or serve their customers? That's what you want to emphasize. The other thing you want to think about is framing your message. So, Daniel Pink, who's an author, he says that we essentially are stimulus rich and context poor, meaning all the things we're just trained to think about what's going on over here, what's going on over there. So when we do consume information, we're often not getting the full picture. So when you think about this from a benefits-based messaging perspective, you want to do something we call framing. So do you want to put it in the context of loss aversion, opportunity cost? Think about it in that way, and it's going to change based on what you're selling, who your audience is. But if you frame the message and the benefit, it's going to probably be more effective as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, appreciate that. All right, so now we're going to get into a little bit on the tactics. Talking about storytelling specifically. What role does data-driven storytelling play in PR, and how can businesses leverage data
Yeah.
to their advantage?
Yeah. So numbers are very, very important because it succinctly helps tell a story or impart significance. When you read a business story, I mean, and I'm not talking about a financial business story, any story that usually has to do with business, it's filled with numbers, with data, with reports. So it's key when you think about traditional media having that data at your fingertips. In fact, media is even changing the way they report based on data. If you think about Axios specifically, I don't know if they've officially trademarked, so I don't know if I would say they've trademarked it, but they've coined an approach they call smart brevity. And what it is think about when you go to Axios to read a story, and they tell you it's going to take you 3 or 4 minutes, and it always starts out the same way. It either tells you kind of the big picture or why the story matters, and then they back it up with a series of data points or insights, because ultimately that's what you're going to comprehend and walk away from. You might not remember all the story quotes or anything like that. So numbers are really important. When using numbers, you have to realize not all numbers are created the same, and yet how do you make the decision about what data to include? The first thing I'd say, it's always best to include your own numbers. And it doesn't have to be a formal study or survey or report. It could be a Twitter poll. It could be internal data. It could really be a lot of different things. If you're using third-party sources, I would say think about using data from industry organizations, government entities, academic institutions. Don't necessarily use data from other companies. And the reason is, number one, let's say you're a law firm, a small law firm, and a big law firm puts out, some study, and you're like, well, this stat's great. This is exactly what we need. Well, by using that stat, if you're doing it ethically and as you should, you're going to have to cite the source somewhere.
That's right.
And what you're then saying to your customer, if they click on that link or see that little footnote or whatever the case is, well, hey, these guys are the experts. Look where the stat came from.
That's
You're
right.
actually, it's almost an involuntary promotion of somebody else.
Hmm.
Also, sometimes stats are created to help tell stories.
Hmm.
And so when they come from a private company, they might not actually be the full truth. It might be what they're trying for you to frame and see. So those are just things I think, when you think about what data to use, you gotta consider.
Yeah, makes sense. It's kind of framing the story, using numbers to tell the story versus telling the story around what the numbers are saying,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot, follow up on the numbers. Do you have a favorite metric that you check often for your clients?
You know, there's not. I will say it's not necessarily a single thing. Not to cop out on the answer there, but the biggest thing you want to think about is, or you want to think about it through two lenses when I'm deciding what data and numbers to use. Is number one, can I pick a data or a statistic that's applicable to the most of the audience who I'm trying to reach? Now, it's not going to be the whole population because you might be dealing with something that's very niche. But what could I use that for my audience is most relevant to
Hmm.
the most amount of people? That might be one side of it. And then the second side is anything that I could show that talks about either dollars and cents or a change in behavior. I want to focus on that. And a lot of times it's not just a point that shows growth, increase, decrease, that sort of thing. That tells a much more interesting story than saying, oh, they sold 500 million last year. Well, that's great, but if they sold 489 million the year before, they're flat. That's not interesting. So you want to think about stats that also I think show changes, whether it be in behavior or other business metrics.
Makes sense. Agree. All right, now we're going to talk about the times you come in when companies aren't doing so well. Crisis management. Uh, how can companies prepare for those situations, so that one, they can try to mitigate them, but how can they prepare for potential PR crises, and how quickly how quickly should they employ a firm to help with those situations?
Yeah. So kind of taking your last question first about when should they employ a firm. I will tell you, most people do not think about a crisis till it happens. That's 99.9% of companies. It's really only your big Fortune 100, 500 companies. I mean, if they haven't thought about it, they got much bigger problems.
Hmm.
But most of when you think about the sheer number of businesses and companies, most people aren't starting with a crisis because you often don't want to think about something bad proactively.
Yep.
And so to that point, most people come when they already have a problem, and that's too late. But it doesn't mean it's not recoverable. If you are having the foresight to plan, there's really two things that you want to think about. So number one is crisis planning and preparedness, and that's uncovering basically areas of risk and then setting up systems and protocols that ensure that everyone across the organization knows what to do in a crisis. And that's both operational and that's from a communications perspective.
Hmm.
And really, in a lot of ways, it's most people shouldn't be talking. So from a communications perspective, it's usually,
Sure.
hey, shut up and pass it along.
Right.
But so with that, you will create. This is the more technical jargon, but we'll create what we call cascade communications plans, message maps, and it basically really spells out how to handle a crisis from a PR perspective, from a procedural standpoint.
Yep.
And then it's also important to have a crisis manual too. It doesn't have to be a long document, but something that people could at least refer to and have handy. It might sit on a shelf. You do need to update it once in a while, but at least it's on the shelf to begin with.
Yep.
And then the other part of crisis planning is just practicing it, actually doing trainings and simulations. So that's how you plan for it. And then once it happens, the thing I'd say is the environment today is, kind of when I talked about PR and how it's very different and actually the same over the last 20 years. With crisis, the kind of the current environment has put it or exacerbated things where usually it's at two ends of the spectrum, a crisis, where your response will be actually to do nothing. And that is the hardest thing for entrepreneurs and founders to do, is to do nothing.
Sure.
That's one option. And then the other option is obviously to proactively respond. But doing nothing, especially when it feels personal, is so hard. As an
Hmm.
example, I got a crisis referral about a month ago. And this guy had a very negative article written about him because of what I'll just say, some legal issues. And the basis of the article was rooted in fact, but in 100%, no question about it, this was a issue of circumstance. And the media outlet really decided to write an article because it was salacious.
Hmm.
And it was 3 years old, but it just was summarized in a report that came across their desk. There really wasn't much reason to do the story. And so the guy came to us and goes, I want to go back to the newspaper. I want them to retract it. I want them to do an interview with me. And, I got to get on the record. And I go, and the thing was, the story published 3 weeks before the guy ever reached out to us, before we were ever put in contact with him. So I go, did you get a lot of calls from your customers or clients about this? I got a couple, but no, not really. And I go, so you haven't heard anything recently? No. I go, well, we want to leave it alone. The last thing we want to do
Right.
is resurface it for people to
Hmm.
see. The news cycle helps you. It sweeps
Sure.
things under the rug. But if something does catch on, it is like wildfire now. And that's, so there's definitely more speed when something does catch on. And so it's, like I said, kind of at both ends of the spectrum.
Sure. Makes sense. So now we're talking about the current day and age, and a little bit about the future. What do you think happens to the industry in the future, and how do tools like AI and automation have an impact on public relations and the way companies interact with PR?
So, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think it would be outlandish to say AI, automation, all sorts of emerging technologies. They'll definitely impact the PR and marketing industries in the future. I think marketing a little bit more than PR, but they'll definitely will play a role. It's almost impossible for any business or sector not to be impacted by them, and I think honestly positively impacted when I say that. So, for instance, in PR areas where it helps, well, it helps with research. Like a lot of industries, it really helps kind of consolidate, expedite, synthesize the research process. So that's a positive. Also, in cases where maybe you're doing something new or for the first time, you could find very good frameworks, or you can create kind of a template for something, a communications plan or some sort of communication that you need to create, using AI. So those are some of the benefits on PR. I think marketing is far wider spread because they're doing imagery, ads, all sorts of stuff. I think more on the marketing side can be done. On the PR side, the thing that also makes it a bit more, why I say there'll be some use, but it's not going to be something that I think can replace the human element. Is that ultimately, before we talked about a personal brand and being authentic.
That's right.
Well, even though you could put the tone of voice you want into Chat GPT or whatever, it's still not authentically you. And yes, you could edit it, but it's taking things that other people have said. There is a, a level of authenticity that can't be met when utilizing artificial intelligence, at least as it exists today.
Yeah.
Also, you can run into unexpected issues. So while before I did say, oh, research is an area where it's great. Well, the thing is, you do have to check where those stats came from. Sometimes
That's
they
right.
came from bogus sources. That's something you have to be considerate of. Also, are you putting in proprietary information? That's something that in the PR industry there's been talk about. And I would say last year when ChatGPT really came on the scene, companies were banning its use because they were afraid that proprietary information was going to get put into these tools.
Right.
So I think it's still TBD, but there's certainly some kind of clear uses.
Got it. That makes sense. All right. Final question for you on actionable tips for entrepreneurs. What's the
Mhm.
one thing that you think that every founder or entrepreneur can do today or needs to do today to start building a positive brand in the marketplace?
Yeah. So what I'll say, I'm going to answer this from the can-do perspective because to be prescriptive and say this is what everyone needs to do, I will tell you, oftentimes when we have a new business client or prospect come to us and they say, I want to do X, we pride ourselves on channel agnostic thinking because sometimes doing X is the right solution.
Hmm.
But sometimes it's the wrong solution. And we rather much more show the fact that we're being thoughtful and
Yep.
strategic rather than just being prescriptive and saying, oh, you want this here, let us take off the shelf. Here you go, here it is.
Yep.
So what I would say to think about doing is, so if, publicity or awareness is your desired result, I actually think you want to think backwards.
Mm.
And I think you want to make sure you have a rock solid foundation. So some of the things we talked about is your brand story, your narrative, your message. Is that all on point? Because that is going to be the basis of your PR efforts. And when people search you out and find things, you need alignment there. So that's number one. Number two, and it kind of complements that, is you have to think about the development or audit of all your different channels. You don't need to be on every a founder or a startup doesn't need to have every social media channel. You don't need to do everything,
Yep.
but the ones you're on, you want to make sure are aligned. And then you want to think about really make sure your audiences are the right audiences. There's times where somebody could say, all right, I'm let's say in your case, I'm an accounting firm and I'm targeting, startups and entrepreneurs. And somebody will say, well, that's your target audience. Well, you might say, well, where we thrive is we thrive in serving clients in these sectors and clients of these size or these company size. You'll think about things like that. You really want to define your audience as much as you can because it'll allow you to tweak kind of both your tactics, but then also think about their pain points. Back to that
Right.
benefits-based messaging.
Yep.
The benefit to one person is easier to define than the benefit to 500 people, which they could all have very different needs. So I would say that. And then the other thing I would say to founders and entrepreneurs is don't bite off more than you could chew.
Mm.
When you have a small staff, or if it's just what you're concerned about, you're concerned about making money. You're concerned about keeping the lights on, about growing your business.
Right.
And ultimately, the core, activity of your business is probably going to trump your marketing and PR efforts to
Hmm.
a certain, certain perspective. So I would say start simpler. You
Definitely.
don't need to do everything at once. and then also know when to ask for help. It's not to say, just absolutely relinquish control. Especially when you are a founder, I think, that control, the vision you have is really important. The
Yep.
expertise you have to share
Yep.
is really important. But know where your strong suits are, know where to ask for help, and know not to necessarily fret over, every detail.
Yeah, makes sense. That's awesome. Fantastic. So I know you just came out with a awesome LinkedIn post today about thought leadership. I loved it. And you're active on LinkedIn. But where can people find you online if they're looking to connect with you, learn more and about you and your business?
Yeah, so I would say actually two places. I would direct you to my LinkedIn. Again, what I just said about channels. At the end of the day, I'm promoting people all day. Promoting myself is sometimes last in my mind. So I know the one channel I'm going to focus on is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, it's Sean with the W, and then Wormstein. Or I would say also where you can learn more about both me and my company, rbbcommunications.com. So that's Robert Boy Boy Communications with an S.com.
Amazing. Well, Sean, thanks so much for doing this. A lot of really, really helpful tips for founders and entrepreneurs in here. I know they're going to love it and look forward to having you back sometime soon.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope all the viewers and listeners hopefully were able to get a couple nuggets.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Sean.
Alrighty.